Special thanks to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for sponsoring today's video. The Soul King is the strongest character in the entire Bleach universe by far. And there's something fun about that. There's something about having an entity who is unequivocally so much more powerful than literally every other character in the story that lends credence and gravitas to the mythos of that world. The Soul King, or ADNYEUS as his name was revealed to us in Core 3, is essentially the god of the Bleach universe, but sadly we never get the opportunity to see him in his prime, or to really glean an understanding of what he's capable of. Which is why today we're taking a look at the true strength of ADNYEUS in his prime, and what that might have looked like, and why the Soul King, the linchpin of the three worlds of Bleach as we know them today, was even stronger than you think. Because it is possible to contextualize his power, even without a definitive showcase from the character or anything even close to that. Even in the present day, even in his current catatonic state, the Soul King is leagues above every single character known to us. This is the man who wielded a godlike power with the authority to utterly transform and shape the world of Bleach into how it would exist, presumably, in perpetuity. Even if he perhaps didn't see himself as such, it's clear that ADNYEUS is absolutely the closest thing to a genuine deity in Bleach, in a narrative dominated by the gods of death themselves. So let's take a look at why ADNYEUS, in his prime, was the strongest Bleach character who ever lived, and why, quite frankly, he remained that way, even in the lead-up to his destined death. Before we get started on the video, guys, consider hitting subscribe down below if you enjoyed it, consider giving the video a thumbs up as well to help support the video, and maybe if you think it's worth it, consider giving it a hype as well, though I'm still not entirely sure how that actually works. Also, check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, as well. Consider giving it a subscribe over there as well if you like what you see, I really would appreciate it. And before we get into the video itself, first, a word from today's sponsor. Tokyo Treat and Sakurako are capping off the year with a pair of very festive snack boxes for us to try, so let's take a look at how Japan celebrates the holidays. Tokyo Treat is an exclusive monthly snack box designed to help you experience a delicious piece of Japanese culture from the comfort of your own home. And this month, the theme of the box is Snack in Wonderland, and it's packed full of delightfully cozy items for you to enjoy, from double berry Kit Kats to merry melon bread and Silent Night salted butter truffles, along with other festive themed snacks. Alright, so we've got our festive themed box here, and I think we should kick things off by taking a look at those aforementioned double berry Kit Kats. I open the packaging, it's an immediate fruity smell, more strawberry than raspberry I think, but I'm wondering if we'll get both of them when we actually try it out. So I'm no food tasting expert by any stretch of the imagination, but the flavour of this definitely comes in waves. As expected, not a huge surprise that berries go really well with chocolate. For those of you that don't know, KFC is a massive thing in Japan at Christmas. Now there doesn't appear to be any KFC in this box today, but just know that Christmas is celebrated with KFC in Japan. I'm going to go with Santa's Strawberry Candy Roll, featuring a strawberry with some serious attitude, while his friend next to him, I don't know, suffering a pretty grisly fate by the looks of things. So this is actually weirdly nostalgic for me. Now obviously we didn't have this specific brand here in the UK, but we used to have a strawberry sweet that was very similar to this. I don't know if it still exists, to be honest. That's a dangerous eat for me. I could very easily just unroll the whole thing and finish it off. So we're going to put it down for now, so we can move on to something else. Meanwhile, Sakurako's theme this month is simply holidays in Japan, and as such, the box has been designed to take you on a tour of Japan's wintertime celebrations, with specially chosen treats such as milk chocolate strawberries, Hokkaido-based strawberry chocolate, aonori senbei, and many more. Plus, they all pair perfectly with the included matcha-infused sencha. Each month, you'll also receive a special tableware item too. This time it's this Minoware indigo plate. So to accompany the theme this month, there are a lot of green items in the Sakurako box, this time a lot of matcha and pistachio. But we're not going to go with anything green. Instead, we're going to go with another Christmassy colour, red. And we're going to go with these prawn crackers and try one of these out. That's spicier than I was expecting it to be. The prawn flavour does come through a little bit later on, but initially you get the crunch, but the spiciness is not what I was expecting, but they do taste really quite nice. Also, unsurprisingly, the prawn crackers, not vegetarian friendly. So the last thing we're going to try is this white chocolate sandwich cookie, very neatly wrapped, a very classy packaging. Let's dive in and have a look. So as you can see, it's two thin white chocolate cookies kind of layered on top of one another. That's where the sandwich name comes from. Very delicate, very flaky, kind of fell apart almost immediately. Actually, the booklet, going back to the booklet, it did say it was melt in your mouth. So as I've referenced a couple of times, each box also comes with a cultural booklet that features snack descriptions, allergen information, and of course some insights into the cultural theming behind the month's boxes. But that's it for December's boxes, and as always I want to say a big thank you to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for supporting the channel for another year, and make sure to pick up these festive boxes either for yourself or for someone you love, maybe as a Christmas present, by visiting the link in the description or the pinned comment down below, and use my code TOMO for an exclusive offer of $5 off your first order, to get a taste of some festive Japanese culture, and also to support the channel as well. It really would be appreciated. Thanks a lot everyone, and as always, enjoy. Okay, so what do we actually know about ADNYEUS, what he can do, and how powerful he really is? While the extent of his powers and abilities has never been officially outlined, and outside of a few tantalizing glimpses in the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime, we've never actually seen him in action in any real way, and it's totally possible he may yet have a plethora of extremely powerful and strange abilities the likes of which we could never dream up. There are numerous examples of him possessing a power or powers greater than anything we've ever seen before in the series. So great, in fact, that they directly interfere with and even quash the other strongest powers in Bleach. But we're not going to start there. One of the most basic, blanket, universal measures of a character's power in Bleach is how much Ryoryoku, or spirit energy, they possess, as this essentially lays the foundation for how strong they can become, how much potential they have, how much latent power is stirring within them. Characters like Ichigo, Aizen, Kenpachi, and Yamamoto, who are themselves well-renowned within Bleach for being some of the biggest powerhouses in the universe, are also famous for having extraordinarily insurmountable Ryoryoku to accompany that fact. In fact, Aizen's is so immense that Yhwach made him a special war power, specifically as a result of it. But the Soul King's Ryoryoku, it's just so incomparably different to even those listed there that it's almost difficult to put into perspective. We only get to witness the Soul King's spiritual pressure when he's killed, but it's enough. When the Soul King is slashed by Ichigo, an initial wave of his incredible power is released as the bindings encasing him are broken, and it's enough to absolutely devastate the area of the Sentient directly beneath the royal palace, as an immense shockwave barrels down from the heavens above and obliterates many of the buildings in the vicinity, toppling towers and shaking the foundations of the Soul Society itself. Yes, the trembling of the three worlds, of the human world of Waco Mundo and of the Soul Society, are a direct result of the Soul King himself nearing death, and therefore the collapse of the worlds is imminent. That barrage of pure power that basically drops onto the Sentient in that moment is the first wave of the Soul King's latent Ryoryoku that has been restrained for potentially 1,000,000 years. Again though, while that in itself is impressive, with a power released in that moment really like any we've rarely seen in Bleach, even that is only a small taste of ADNYEUS' true Ryoryoku. As I said, Ichigo's initial slash only breaks the bindings, sealing the Soul King within his crystal prison. Once Yhwach actually kills the Soul King, and then attempts to take his power in full, well, things don't quite go according to plan. Yhwach himself is already one of the single strongest beings in all of Bleach, even before trying to absorb his father's power, with an utterly vast amount of Ryoryoku himself, capable of pinning an entire village worth of Quincy's to the ground with his mere Reiatsu. And yet here, as Yhwach begins to absorb his father's power, remember, Yhwach has the special ability to freely take power as he pleases. This time it seems like he's bitten off a little more than he can chew. He finds that even he can't manage it in full, and collapses to one knee, struggling against the strain. And in the end, Yhwach only manages to absorb an unspecified portion of ADNYEUS' strength, An enormous surplus of that power then flows out of the Quincy King again and spills over into the Serete far below. But the thing is, this time, it isn't just power per se. The Soul King's Raryoku is so incredible and so dense that it actually takes the form, physical form, of a mass of tangible, seemingly living autonomous creatures. Strange, inky black, baby-like monsters with a massive eyeball, and in the anime, a gaping mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. Yes, his power is so colossal that it takes the form of not just one living entity but potentially millions. Imagine Stark and Lilinet and their unique situation, but multiplied by a nigh unquantifiable amount. Sure, each of the individual eyeball monsters isn't as sophisticated as Lilinet, but I can't overemphasize enough. There are millions of these things. To be honest, calling it colossal is just not doing it justice. Colossal is the kind of word you would use to describe the power of someone like the aforementioned Ichigo, Aizen, Yhwach, etc. In comparison, there isn't really a great word to describe the sheer gulf between what I'm describing now regarding the Soul King and the rest of the characters in the series. This army of eyeball monsters is so titanic that they overwhelm the entirety of the Gotei 13's current fighting force at that time with ease, as though they are a force of nature itself, just like water breaking on rocks. Ikkaku, Yumichika, and Hisagi couldn't even hope to make a dent in the power. Soifon leaps forward with her bankai and is instantly swallowed up. And when Byakuya tries to use his Zanpakuto against the oncoming onslaught, he looks like he might be successful initially, but it is totally overpowered and beaten back, as though Byakuya's own strength is completely meaningless before it. The only character in the moment who seems remotely capable of fighting back against this surplus of Raryoku is Aizen himself. The Soul Society literally had to release the Shinigami, with perhaps the greatest well of Raryoku of them all, to do battle with Ryo's own power. A surplus of Ryo's own power. And yes, Aizen does succeed in wiping out the Soul King's oncoming army with a fully powered Hado 90. Though admittedly, this in itself is a little bit weird, and the anime, I would say, makes it even more questionable, as we see the full extent of the Soul King's power enveloping the Serete, and it's completely drowning the cityscape. Even if Aizen did stave off Ryo's power with his Hado spell, it only destroyed what was in that fairly small vicinity in the grand scheme of things. You can see how much of the Serete Kurohitsugi affected. I assume that was basically the end of the power surplus and Aizen was able to protect the Gotei 13 and their headquarters, the lab, from the crushing torrent of power, which was ultimately their goal in the first place, to ensure the gate could still be built. But yeah, this army of eyeball monsters is actually, in my opinion, a very effective method of demonstrating the Soul King's true strength, or at the very least the scope of it. If left unchecked, his mere Raryoku, that's just kind of spilling out of him at this point, would completely swallow the Soul Society whole. And don't forget, like I said many times now, this is just a surplus of his power. Yhwach absorbed a lot of it, while more of the Soul King's power exists in several other disparate places too, which we'll get to. But I mean, looking at this, especially the way it's portrayed in the anime, it is not too surprising that he was able to split and potentially shape the Soul Society into being. Let's not forget as well that once Yhwach has actually managed to absorb some of his father's strength and survive the process, he himself claims to now be overflowing with power, and his very design is emblematic of the fact that that should be taken literally, that he can't contain the Soul King's strength. Now a black ooze is constantly flowing down his body at all times, and an aura of tar-like Raryoku emanates from him even when he's simply sitting down. While he can now wield this power as well, it's clear that it's too much for his actual physical form to subdue, and I kind of wonder if he had been left to his own devices, if he would have just stayed like this forever, until maybe the majority of the Soul King's power wore off or maybe ran out. Don't forget as well that when the Schutzstoffel first see Yhwach after he has absorbed the Soul King, the Soul King's power is also coating the entire room. It is all over the floor. It is a physical, again, tangible object that Askin kind of steps in and he's like, what is this strange black ooze coming off of His Majesty? It's a physical representation of the Soul King's overflowing, ocean-like strength. It's more than an ocean. You know, it's insane. So, yeah, that's just the Soul King's kind of baseline power. But again, even that doesn't tell the full story. By the time we see the Soul King, he's a shell of his true prime self. His body has been carved up through unknown means, at least according to the anime's version of events, which I'm most fascinated to see, and as a result is basically just a shadow, albeit one of still immeasurable power of who he once was. At one point he was commanding this strength that we see enveloping the Soul Society and even more. Despite this current form of the Soul King being completely crippled, however, he still possesses one incredible, divine ability that has essentially guided both his and the Soul Society's destiny for over 1,000 years. The truest ability to see the future. Now, the Almighty is the single most broken ability in Bleach, allowing the user to not only see into the future, but to also manipulate it as well. The wielder of the Almighty can see every single possible future laid out before them, as though they were grains of sand. Their all-seeing eyes bearing witness to each and every change, every possibility, every fate and destiny that can supposedly play out, and everything is subject to their whim. In that sense, the Almighty is absolutely a fitting name. Now, interestingly, in both the manga and the anime so far, it's never explicitly said that ADNYEUS wields the Almighty. That revelation actually comes from Can't Fear Your Own World. Though if I'm being honest, I'm finding myself more and more reticent to use the light novel when it comes to the Soul King. You know, despite the light novel actually containing his backstory, which was extremely valuable at the time, it seems like the anime is changing and even contradicting it somewhat. And should we, I hope, get a true look at this character in Core 4, then maybe we'll finally know for sure the answers that we're after. Instead, the Almighty, as referenced above, seems to be a power that belongs to Yhwach himself, and is shared between him and his other half, Hashwolf, when the Quincy King sleeps. However, the Soul King definitely not only possesses elements of the Almighty as we know it, but in actuality possesses the strongest, truest form of this power. Across the many different iterations of the Soul King, we see a variety of strange eyes. Pernida, for example, sports a giant eyeball in the centre of its palm with 2 pupils. Meanwhile, Yhwach, when the Almighty has fully awakened, now bears 3 pupils per eye. And yet ADNYEUS, uniquely, features 4 pupils per eye. And if we're to believe these eyes designate some kind of hierarchy among potential the Almighty users, then it's clear that ADNYEUS' ability to see the future eclipses all others, including Yhwach's. But what does this really mean? Surely if you can see all futures, then you can see all futures, right? It's pretty simple. And yes, that's true. But what this actually means is that the Soul King's eyes have the ability to escape Yhwach's the Almighty. They circumvent it, and that goes for all forms of the Soul King too. So the likes of the right arm, Mimihagi, despite only having the 1 pupil, can also move unnoticed by Yhwach's otherwise completely discerning eyes. This is a major flaw in Yhwach's otherwise completely all-encompassing ability. Where ADNYEUS was capable of seeing the future in its entirety, likely, as Yhwach speculates, even foreseeing his death potentially 1,000,000 years ahead of time, Yhwach can't see anything relating to his father. The real question of whether or not ADNYEUS actually wields the Almighty as we know it comes from the fact that in the manga and the anime, it is currently unknown to us whether or not he can alter the future like Yhwach can. Perhaps he can, and he simply chose not to interfere, because he already saw how things would play out. Another clue that ADNYEUS possesses at least some form of the Almighty, some version of the Almighty, and a greater one than Yhwach's at that, is the fact that the Soul King has the power to completely shut down the Almighty itself, presumably by sealing it with an even greater power, as seen when Yhwach steals Pernida from Ichibe, only for it to backfire as the Soul King's limb quashes Yhwach's sight, robbing him of the ability to see the future until the moment of his death. Look, the truth is, at the end of the day, it's very likely that Ryo does in fact possess the Almighty, and not just the Almighty, but the truest, greatest version of it as well. I just want to be clear that so far, it's never explicitly stated as being such in the manga and the anime. That being said, the way we see Ryo's eyes glittering, it certainly seems as such. But Can't For Your Own World again actually notes that ADNYEUS uses the Almighty to split the primordial world, and again, the anime seems to be going in a different direction to this, perhaps, or at the very least he is using a strange ceremonial sword as some kind of a conduit. But it seems as though being attached to said sword is maybe what causes the Soul King's body to break apart in the first place. So, the Soul King houses enough latent rare Yoku, even in his carved up state, to completely destabilize and consume the Serete, and possibly even more if left unchecked. On top of that, he is able to see the future in its entirety, and wields the greatest possible version of this power, strong enough to evade and eclipse Yhwach's the Almighty. But even so, the Soul King isn't done. For this is truly a divine being the likes of which, even as a concept, feels so completely alien in the world of Bleach. Even though the Soul King's limbs and organs were somehow removed, again the anime seems to be teasing a different story to that which was told in Can't For Your Own World, they too were strong enough to become something more on their own. ADNYEUS' arms themselves literally govern the concepts of stagnation and progression, and once separated from the main body they gained sentience and acquired a power to the point where the right arm came to be worshipped as a god itself in the Rukongai, while the left arm, once stolen by Yhwach, was given a position within his Schutzstaffel as an elite guard, and one of the strongest of all the Sternritter. The children of lower noble houses, the likes of Kyoraku Shunsui, have even heard rumours of this strange godlike power that literally fell from the heavens eons ago, and that the Soul King's body itself possesses strange properties. And of course, we see this play out. In fact, some of our most direct exposure to the Soul King comes from his arms. Mimihagi, through its control over stagnation, portions out a piece of its power to the dying Ukitake, and in doing so helps him to live a normal life for hundreds and hundreds of years, and not only live a normal life, but become one of the strongest Shinigami in the Gotei 13. And this is only a piece of Mimihagi's strength, as emphasized by the anime version. The real Mimihagi, forever enshrined in the Rukongai, simply passes a shadow of its power into Ukitake, and that shadow is what later consumes Ukitake's body from the inside out through the ritual of Kamikake to hold the rapidly merging worlds in place. And therein is another example of the Soul King's absolute power. Even just his right arm, and again a shard of its actual strength, was able to hold Yhwach back for a time, when Yhwach was actively trying to tear it apart in order to collapse the worlds. The anime honestly makes this even more impressive, allowing Mimihagi through Ukitake to not only put up more of a battle, but to continue holding the three worlds in place, not only for a much longer amount of time, but long after Yhwach has actually absorbed the main portion of the Soul King himself. And I feel like that actually gives us a fairly good idea of where Yhwach is prior to absorbing the Soul King relative to his father. At that point in time, he is stronger than just the right arm. A portion of the right arm's power anyway, a single limb, and even then he's unable to overpower Mimihagi immediately. Then of course there's the left arm, Pernida Pankajaz, which again was deemed strong enough to earn itself a place among Yhwach's Schutzstaffel, and like Gerard and Leal, it's one of the few Quincy that feels genuinely godlike. Now Pernida professes to Mairi that it has always been a Quincy, which is a hint towards the Soul King's true nature, that he is the progenitor of at least the Quincy race, but likely multiple other races in the Bleach world as well. And that goes doubly so for when Yhwach reveals that his eyes, the eyes with multiple pupils, are proof of a true Quincy, implying that whatever this true Quincy is, it was born of the Soul King's own true nature. Anyway, as a piece of the Soul King, Pernida already possessed its power of the compulsory. Yhwach simply named it as such, and this power of the compulsory quite clearly stems from the idea that Pernida governs the concept of progression. Pernida is capable of defeating captain-level enemies almost instantly thanks to its absurd abilities, and even gave the perpetually prepared Mayuri his most deadly battle since Uryu in the Soul Society arc. As a villain, Pernida is, simply put, one of the most ruthlessly effective of the Sternritter, taking out Kenpachi in a matter of seconds, killing Nemu, and driving Mayuri into a genuine corner, doing enough damage to the mad scientist to remove him from the remainder of the war. Its ability to constantly grow and evolve, to multiply endlessly, is evidence again of its control over progression, and like the other angelic Schutzstaffel members, it is almost impossible to kill. Again, Mayuri, through Nemu's unwitting sacrifice, really got lucky with a near-perfect solution. So yes, even just a sentient limb of the Soul King is strong enough to put captains on the back foot and go toe-to-toe with the Zero Division, even completely overpowering Kiryu Hikifune in the anime. And then there's Gerard Valkyrie. While he himself isn't the actual heart of the Soul King, he's more a retainer for the heart itself, in a similar fashion to how Ukitake housed the right arm. But the heart is clearly monstrously powerful in its own right, giving Gerard the ability to seemingly resurrect without limit, even if his entire body is totally reduced to dust. Now, when it comes to Gerard and the heart's influence over the Quincy, we are speculating a lot more than we were with the arms, as we are simply given much less concrete evidence to work with. However, the heart clearly represents life, and so at the very least, being the retainer of the heart gave Gerard that aspect of the miracle, or the power that would come to be named as the miracle, though it wouldn't surprise me if, like Pernida, the heart of the Soul King makes up the constitution of the miracle itself. The idea that Gerard can achieve the impossible, and the greater the odds are stacked against him, the more powerful and successful he'll actually be. Obviously, we only really see Gerard in a battle scenario, and so that equates to, well, his limbs regrowing after being cut off, becoming stronger, and the same happening with his entire body when it revives. But again, this retainer of the Soul King's heart is so absurdly strong that he may very well be the single most capable Quincy under Yhwach's command, the one who, in his own words, was not only bestowed with everything, but who will continue to swing his sword for his god, even in death. While it's never outright confirmed that Gremmy's true form, that of a brain in a jar, is the brain of the Soul King, it is heavily implied, again, within the light novel Can't Find Your Own World, and to be honest, that would make a lot of sense to me. Once again, Grammy wields an absolutely absurd and almost godlike power in the Visionary, where anything he can imagine becomes reality. The major issue, though, with Grammy being a part of the Soul King, however, is that it isn't mentioned that he had his power before meeting Yhwach and receiving a shrift. As far as we know, this ability of the Visionary was awakened within Grammy like most other Sternritter, upon receiving a shrift, meaning the Visionary wouldn't be a power the Soul King himself inherently possessed, which seems kind of unlikely to me when the two other Sternritter who happen to be related to Rayo each had their abilities prior to receiving shrift. Can't For Your Own World once again goes a step further, revealing that Fullbringers all contain small pieces of the Soul King within them, and that those pieces act almost like Hogyoku, granting them the powers they have. Again, while this isn't yet confirmed in the manga or the anime, it would line up with what we know about the Soul King so far, insofar as his body has unique and weird properties, and that it affects mortals by comparison in unusual ways. But that's an in-depth look at the frankly absurd and godlike, divine power that belonged to Soul King ADNYEUS. These days it has all been separated, split apart, and found very much in disparate places all across the Bleach world. But it's absolutely insane to try and imagine the originator, the progenitor of almost all power in Bleach, once wielding all of this power as one. It makes it incredibly easy to see and understand how someone like this would have had the strength to literally take and mold the world of Bleach, the universe of Bleach, into what we know and see it as today. That he himself, as one singular being, would have power so great he could quite easily swallow up an entire world. That he himself would control and govern natural concepts like progression and stagnation simply within his own body. That he himself would essentially be capable of performing miracles that he would be nigh impossible to actually truly kill. And that he himself would be able to see the future in its absolute entirety, to see the world as he will make it right up until the very moment of his death at the hands of his son. Prime Soul King ADNYEUS is on such a completely different level to everyone else in Bleach, to everything we know in Bleach, that it is essentially an impossibility to truly quantify, to truly get across. I don't really have the vocabulary to do it justice. You know, we look at characters like Gerard Valkyrie and we go, that's one of the most broken and craziest characters in all of Bleach, but even he is just an aspect of a wider whole, of the Soul King himself. And that kind of thing is genuinely difficult to pass. But yeah, I know that I am still desperately hoping that we will get to see the prime version of the Soul King, the prime version of ADNYEUS, at least briefly, in Core 4 of the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime, even if it's just an unabridged, completed version of that flashback that they have been teasing playing out before us. That would be wonderful to see, but we're going to have to wait until at least next year to find out if that dream ever comes true. Alright everyone, well that's it for today's video. As always, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Just how strong was Prime Soul King ADNYEUS? Is there more to this character than I've even laid out here today in this video? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below about how strong you think he is, what he's actually capable of, if anyone or anything could have ever hoped to have stood up against him. In the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime, when Yhwach is ever so slightly recounting the story of ADNYEUS, he does mention a darkness, a mysterious, unknowable darkness that threatened the primordial sea that ADNYEUS apparently somehow dispelled. Whether that was perhaps the progenitor of Hollows or not, we have no idea, but again, I'm really hoping we do eventually find out. And also let me know your thoughts on whether or not you think the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime is in the process of changing and altering the Soul King story as we saw it in Can't Fear Your Own World. Will the light novel's version of events still be able to be taken as gospel once the anime is all said and done? I'd love to get your thoughts again on that down in the comments below as well. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already. It really does mean the world. It does help me out a massive amount as well. Check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, and as always, a huge thank you and a massive shout out goes out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. Each and every one of you is helping to make this channel a reality still today, so if you want to take your support another step further over there as well, consider doing so. It does mean the absolute world. Alright everyone, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.